Hi Year 13, this is our final revision session on Top Girls. After this point we'll be starting to think about how we can use our knowledge to create exam responses. In this lesson we're going to be looking at Act 3. Sorry, I skipped on a bit further and a bit quicker than I wanted to there. So in Act 3 then, if we remember, Churchill wrote this as a non-chronological text, and so we read Act 3 last, but if we were reading it in chronological order, Act 3 would come first. Now, Churchill made that intentional choice because she wanted to suspend information about Marlene's past and background until the end. So up until this point, we see Marlene as a successful, career-driven woman. And we don't have any information about her own background, her own life, and her own sacrifices. We've had hints that there might be sacrifices because of all of the women in Act 1. They had to make sacrifices in order to gain success. But in this act, we get a real sense of Marlene's working class background. We learn that she succeeded in life despite coming from a working class family, but we're forced to consider and view at what expense she's achieved this success. So it seems as though Marlene has had to distance herself entirely from her past, so almost erase her past, creating a new life for herself, and that even included leaving her daughter. And for that reason, I think that The Map Woman from Duffy's collection is a really good poem to compare to Top Girls because of that idea of trying to escape your past and create a new future for yourself, but the past keeps sneaking up on you. So in this act, we learn that the past, Marlene can't fully escape her past and that it always keeps sneaking up on her and it's always there. We need to begin by, again, revisiting this word, dichotomy. Dichotomy means that there is a stark opposition between two characters. They create a very stark difference in the characters. And Churchill creates a dichotomy between the two sisters, between Joyce and Marlene. So we're going to begin our lesson by examining how Churchill creates that dichotomy between the two characters. And the reason that she does this to show that Marlene has moved away from her working class background. So Joyce almost acts as a foil for Marlene, if you like. She shows us what Marlene's life could have been like had she not made those sacrifices and chased the working life. So, some quotations that demonstrate the dichotomy between the two women. Joyce says this first quotation, "You're the," and then she gets interrupted by Marlene, but continues, "You're the one went away, not me. I'm right here where I was." So instantly we get a sense that Marlene has moved out of that space, out of her working class background and into something different, whereas Joyce has stayed put right where she was, and she repeats that idea after as well. Remember that you want to try and remember some quotations from the text so that you don't always have to flick back through the text. It is an open book exam, but it's best to have a few short quotations in your memory. So I'm right here where I was is a good short quotation that we can remember to demonstrate that whilst Marlene has moved forward with her life, Joyce feels a sense of entrapment and feels stuck. So if you had a question about entrapment, that would be a good quotation as well. Marlene says about their childhood, "I was the little one and I was clever." Now, that shows that the difference between the two women is something that has been happening since they were children, almost something that they were born with. So one was born with what it takes, using that quotation again, to go out and achieve what she likes in life, and one of them wasn't. Now, I wonder if that reminds you of two other characters in the play, because for me, I think that's a hint at the idea of history repeating itself, of this problem and this conflict between women that has occurred because of the rise of the new women being a cycle that will repeat, because it makes me think of Kit and Angie. Kit is younger, so she's the little one, but she's also cleverer, and so she has those aspirations to be a nuclear physicist, whereas Angie is older, but doesn't have what it takes, in Marlene's words, and therefore probably repeat the same cycle that Joyce has lived through, of being stuck, that feeling of entrapment as well, and the idea that the only thing she can hope for is a marriage that will support her. So I think that particular quotation demonstrating the dichotomy between Marlene and Joyce is important because it reflects the ideas that we have been shown about Kit and Angie, and therefore shows that this is a cycle that will keep repeating itself unless something changes, unless there is a way for women to find a way to achieve success and support a family as well. So there's clearly a lot of conflict between the two women. It's very uncomfortable to read the first part of the act where Joyce clearly wasn't expecting Marlene to turn up and feels uncomfortable with Marlene being there. And they're very short with each other as well in the way that they speak, and Joyce continually gripes at Marlene. And this is because Joyce feels that Marlene left her to deal with everything and that her going away to pursue her career was selfish. They talk about how Joyce took on Marlene's child for her, allowing her and freeing her to go and do what she'd like. They also talk about how Joyce has taken on all responsibilities of care for their parents. Now, for me, I think that highlights to the audience that Marlene has been very selfish in her choice just to go away from it all and forget about it all, because she didn't think about the fact that Joyce has had to stay behind and pick up the pieces. And that's demonstrated when Joyce says, "How could I have left?" Marlene seems to think that leaving is an easy choice and that Joyce could have just chosen to do the same as Marlene. But Joyce has a different ideology and felt that it was her duty to stay behind and look after the child and to look after her parents. And there's a clear sense of the fact that Marlene hasn't really empathised with Joyce in that way and understood that her own actions have impacted upon her sister Joyce, who is left behind to pick up the pieces, if you like. But there's also a lack of understanding from Joyce to Marlene as well. Joyce doesn't understand how Marlene could have made such individualistic choices. She says, "I don't know how you could leave your own child." So the conflict comes because there's a total lack of understanding between the two women. Marlene can't understand why Joyce didn't just leave, and Joyce can't understand why Marlene did just leave. And that's created conflict. Their two paths in life has created further conflict between women. And that's one of the big ideas that Churchill wanted to highlight to us, that this rise of the new woman can cause conflict between women who make different choices, as exemplified by these two characters. I also wanted to explore, as we look through Act 3, Marlene's attitude to motherhood and the presentation of motherhood, because we've explored that in Duffy's poems, and it's important, if it comes up as an exam question, that we have some ideas prepared for how to talk about it with Top Girls. So I think that the presentation of motherhood in Act 3 is an interesting one. Joyce clearly feels a sense of entrapment as a result of her role in motherhood. She feels that looking after Angie meant that she couldn't go out and pursue a career. Marlene doesn't at first seem to hold a great deal of emotional attachment towards Angie, and I think it's interesting that she says, "I think I owe Angie a few presents." Because for me that reveals the idea that Marlene thinks that all problems can be solved with money. It highlights that she's not thought about her child very much. She's missed her birthdays and Christmases, and she thinks that buying her expensive gifts is what Angie needs from her. She thinks that all problems can be solved with money. However, what Angie probably needs from her would be time and love. There's also a lack of understanding between Marlene and Angie. There's clearly a great distance emotionally between them. Marlene admits, "How do I know what she's like?" demonstrating that she hasn't given her a great deal of thought, perhaps, or that she hasn't spent very much time with her at all. And even when she talks directly with Angie, again, she's focused on Angie's path for the future. She doesn't see Angie's trajectory as being towards this high-powered career. Instead, she offers the suggestion that Angie might work with children. "Do you want to work with children, Angie?" Again, being that traditionally female role. So she's perpetuating the system of women going into traditionally female roles, but equally is denying her own child, her own offspring, that same opportunity that she's had. She's positioning Angie as following Joyce's path rather than her own. And then the two women start to talk about politics, and this is where the dichotomy between the two women is particularly evident. Now, you'll need to think back to your Blood Brothers context knowledge to fully understand this scene. It was written in the 80s, just like Blood Brothers, where stratification of classes was prominent in society. The working class and the middle class existed in separate spheres and were very much separate and distinct classes. It wasn't like today, where class is more fluid, people move between classes, people have friends who would be in different socio-economic groups, etc. It was very much, everything was kept separate. Marlene adopts the ideologies of the New Conservative Party and the policies of Margaret Thatcher, who was in power at the time, whereas Joyce is aligned with the working class and the interests of the Labour Party. We also know that Churchill was a socialist, and so we can infer from that it's probable that she would be scathing of the Thatcheristic ideologies of the Conservative Party. Ultimately, then, Churchill does seem to position the audience to side with Joyce. However, she doesn't want us to view Joyce as a working class hero, because Joyce is very much full of content. She's not a happy character, and therefore she doesn't seem to position us to believe that either end of the scale, if you like, is ideal. She doesn't think that women should be entrapped in the domestic world. She doesn't think that women should feel stuck and unable to join the working people. Equally, she doesn't think that people should be completely selfish and just completely career driven. So Churchill is presenting to us the idea that there must be some middle ground between those two ideas. Marlene's Thatcheristic ideology is presented as viciously individualistic, whereas Joyce's ideology is seen as, she's full of resentment and contempt. And so neither character is perfect, and we're not supposed to see either character as the hero of the play. Can you now have a look through Act 3, and can you find evidence to support the fact that both women hold opposing political ideals? So find evidence of Marlene's political ideals, and then find evidence of Joyce's political ideals. Spend about 10 minutes on that. Off you go. Okay, wonderful. So I've just picked out one quotation that you can add to your list if you like. Marlene says, anyone can do anything if they've got what it takes. So Marlene is a character that Churchill modelled on Margaret Thatcher, and through her she wanted to show that viciously individualistic rhetoric that Margaret Thatcher promoted quite a lot. Can you find any other evidence of Marlene's language mirroring Thatcherism? Do you remember when we looked at the context of the play, we looked at some of those Margaret Thatcher quotations? Again, have a look through and see if any of the quotations, either the ones you've written down for political ideals or quotations that you find through scanning the text, see if any of those mirror Thatcherism. Off you go. Okay, so we do see Marlene as a selfish character. We do see Marlene as adopting the viciously individualistic ideology of monetarianism, but we also do see her as a broken character, and we are supposed to sympathise with both Marlene and Joyce. They're both victims of a system created by society. And we see this when Marlene cries, that's the stage direction quoted there, and also admits and says, I knew I'd cry if I wasn't careful, which demonstrates that whilst Marlene has this hardened exterior, she is quite ruled by emotions, and those emotions are never too far away. And the emotion that she holds that's never too far away is sadness and probably regret at the life she's left behind. probably a sense of guilt as well. So Churchill does show us that it's not possible for a character to be completely individualistic. When Marlene says, I believe in the individual, look at me, that's potentially a lie, because there's definitely a sadness that's occurred as a result of her isolating herself from her family. So if you had a question about isolation, undoubtedly you'd want to use that second quotation there. I knew I'd cry if I wasn't careful, because while she presents isolation as being the ideal, she professes not to want a relationship, not to want children, saying that those things would only hold her back. Ultimately, she does mask and hide a lot of sadness. So looking at Act 3 as a whole then, we've learnt that Marlene is from a working class background and that information is suspended right until the end of the play. We learn that she has a child and that she is left to pursue her career. For the first time, we start to see the sacrifice that Marlene has made. In Act 1, we listened to the women talk about their own stories of sacrifice and success, but we didn't know anything about Marlene. We listened to the women talk about their experience of motherhood, but Marlene remains quiet. And therefore, it's interesting for us then to learn this information right at the end of the play and learn essentially that Marlene has been hiding a lot of things and that she's had to hide those things and mask those things and become this almost duplicitous character where she puts on the face of the hardened career woman, all the while masking the sadness and the sacrifices that she has made to get there. We also begin to see her as an isolated character. But back with her family, she shows her vulnerability when she starts to cry. So if you had a question about vulnerability as well, this would be a good act to examine in terms of the fact that Marlene masks that vulnerability. You could compare that with the Map Woman as well, how she masks the vulnerability, but it's only a return to their past that allows them to explore and demonstrate that. As a final question then, I want you to think on the whole, do we sympathise with Marlene? I'd like you to answer that question, and then I'd like you to support your answer with evidence from the text and an analysis of a quotation. Off you go. Okay, wonderful. All that's left for us to do then from Top Girls is to explore the ending. Now, I think the ending, when I first read the play, I thought it ended really abruptly, and I thought, oh, that was really unusual that it just ends like that and then there's nothing. Because I felt like we'd only just begun to learn about a character. However, I think the ending is completely loaded with questions, and I think that's what postmodern theatre intends to do, to raise questions rather than to answer them. Now, it's Angie that delivers this final line, and I think in itself that's quite poignant as well, because we're forced to question what is frightening. Now, on a surface level, it seems that Angie has had a bad dream or something like that, and that's what's assumed by the characters around her, by Marlene. However, I think Angie's asking, Angie presents this as a bigger point, that what's frightening is the future for Angie. So Marlene has said anyone can do anything if they've got what it takes, but she's also said of her own daughter, she's not got what it takes. And therefore it is quite frightening. What does the future hold for Angie? Her own mother has said that she'd better hope to get married. I don't know who'd have her mind, demonstrating that even the more traditional role of a woman that Angie could pursue might be difficult for her. And so life will be difficult for Angie moving forward in this modern world, and the new opportunities afforded to women won't necessarily be available to her. And where does that leave her? And I think that is in itself quite a frightening thought, and that's why Churchill's ended the play with this particular point. Okay, so that's our Act 3 revision session. If you have any questions, do email me or ask me through Show My Homework, and have a lovely half term.